just go down this list and start. Jay and Scott, you've got 5 minutes between you.
Los Alamos, the big news, of course, is the PIP reduction decision impacting both Los Alamos and the Savannah River. So on the 10th, the National Nuclear Security Administration said it's going to be at least 30 pits per year at Los Alamos and at least 30 at Savannah. Underline those 2 words, at least, because this is mission creep. You know, it used to be up to, but now it's at least. I personally believe, and little birdies have told me, what they're really shooting for is a total of 125 pits per year in aggregate, which actually would conform to what they explicitly stated back in the middle 2000s that they wanted to do for the reliable replacement warhead. Now, on an interesting note, Los Alamos, in my view, is quite an arrogant institution and always has been, you know, culturally, and, you know, I think they're a bunch of PhDs and above everybody else. So I note with irony how the scuttlebutt I and others are hearing is that, you know, U.S. Stratcom, which is Strategic Command, in other words, the highest levels of government are beginning to have doubts that Los Alamos can produce pits at all, just as a matter of competence. And I think this is a lot of the driver, actually. Loss of confidence in Los Alamos is a driver for there being pit production at Savannah. More formally, we hear that the Pentagon is basically demanding redundancy. You know, they have 2 sites that produce. We should note that the concrete programmatic driver for pit production just got wiped out by House Energy and Water when it redirected, requested $53 million for interoperable warhead into a study. So if that actually becomes law, if that becomes the Senate, there is no clear, concrete reason for pit reduction. And I think I should stop right there, given time limits, and let Scott cover some environmental matters.
All right, Los Alamos is starting its first environmental management contract under EM and not under the NNSA.
What's EM?
Environmental management. And so they've separated it out of the weapons budget for the first time in Los Alamos' history, which was generally a good thing, except that one of the subcontractors they hired is a subcontractor called Tetra Tech. Now, Tetra Tech is involved in a questionable cleanup in the San Francisco Bay area at a place called Hunters Point. It's been called the largest eco-fraud in history. They have falsified sampling records and hauled off dirt that was maybe not cleaned. So if you have Tetra Tech at your site, be sure and pay attention. The Tetra Tech also wrote the environmental report for the Holtec project, so you know, they're everywhere, and they're, you know, a bad example of a contractor. Also, the chromium plume at Los Alamos is still creeping along. They've figured out, you know, they're pumping and treating on one side to keep it off the San Ildefonso Pueblo land, but apparently that's squishing it, shooting it around the other side, so it's escaping out the other way, you know, out due east, so it's still an ongoing issue there.
And I should have mentioned that a new contractor for Los Alamos could literally be announced any hour.
Yeah, the overall M&O contractor could be announced any time now. So, the thing up in the air.
Any questions?
Well, I am too, because it's maybe UT Austin.
Rick?
Yeah, so is that the one that universities have applied
Yes.
for, either in whole or in partnership?
It's Texas University, Texas A&M, and the University of California.
Purdue?
Yeah, Purdue's going in with who?
With who?
Well, with Bechtel. Purdue is going in with Bechtel. The other 2 universities have not announced who their corporate partners are.
Thank you very much. That was short. Good job.
Even though I'm up there twice, I'm only try to do everything in one. But there's two things I want to tell you about. One is Oak Ridge and the UPF, Uranium Processing Facility bomb plant. As most of you know, we filed a lawsuit with Nuclear Watch New Mexico and Natural Resource Defense Council, and that case finally got moved to Tennessee and assigned to a judge who is an Obama appointee without much of a track record, so we're hopeful. We don't have a timeline yet for that, but just this week the government, in response to our lawsuit, has released a second supplement analysis for the Y12 site, in which they're trying just basically to cover their ass with paper, try to look good in front of the judge. We only had a chance to glance at it, and we're pretty sure they did not manage to do what they hoped to do. So there is that. At the end of March, the NNSA gave itself permission to begin construction on the UPF. That authorization required them to complete the baseline cost estimate. As all of you know, because you asked for it in every office you visited, we haven't been able to get those numbers yet. But because of EC days, thanks to everybody, I think we will get them. At least a version of it, maybe with some stuff redacted out. But that's the status, I think, of the UPF at this point. The second thing I want to talk about goes back some to what Amy was saying in her presentation, and I think I mentioned this previously, or maybe it was in our newsletter, and I may have sent out to Bananas. In June of this year, the first week in June, the Presbyterian Church General Assembly will meet in St. Louis, Missouri, and they will consider an overture to the church to ask the United States government to sign and ratify the nuclear ban treaty. And as a part of that overture, they will ask the church as a whole to educate its congregations about nuclear weapons and encourage them to find ways to be involved in nuclear weapons. This overture came out of East Tennessee Presbytery. Aretha wrote it, but Presbyterian pastors that we know got it passed in North Carolina and in Presbytery de Cristo down on the border. So my point is that not every congregation is going to say, oh, the General Assembly did this, but there will be a reason to talk to Presbyterians in your community about nuclear weapons. You might wait after the news comes out, and we'll let you know how the vote goes and what the overture actually says when they finish working on it. But you might have entree, especially if you have a fairly progressive Presbyterian congregation in your community, be able to go to them and say, I could be a resource. If y'all want to follow up on this overture, I'm aware that this happened, and I could be a resource or connect you to a resource. In terms of churches educating themselves about nuclear weapons, I don't think most of it is very dated, but a couple of years ago, 2 years ago in January, Denny Kelly and I prepared a curriculum that was used by the United Church of Christ for online adult education about nuclear weapons. So there are already resources available, and our hope was really exactly that this is how it would play out, and it seems to be playing out that way. So I'm happy to be, my other life was to be a Presbyterian minister for 20 years. I'm happy to be a resource to you if you get a chance to talk to Presbyterians in your community. And if you get the Presbyterians talking, if the Catholics will talk because the Pope has asked them to talk about this kind of stuff, who knows where it will lead. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
Yes. Are you suggesting that we contact Presbyterians after the main meeting votes on it?
Yeah.
Not before?
What's the date?
And will you,
When is the meeting again?
I think they meet from June 2nd through the 9th.
and you'll send out?
Yeah, I'll let you know when the overture passes.
Come to Nakuchi.
Yeah. Where my former co-pastor was.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments for Ralph? And do send that out, that's pretty cool.
Hi, so I do outreach in Site 300. Site 300 is part of Livermore Lab. It's the open air test site. So that's actually in my hometown, Tracy. And the update that I do want to give is that Livermore Lab field office, they released a proposal to increase the size of these outdoor blasts that do contain toxins late last year, November 2017. So our job as Tri-Valley Care is we inform the community, and as a result we did get over 2,000 sign-on public comments during the comment period to the lab directly. We also got the Tracy City Council, the San Joaquin Board of supervisors and a few other state departments that actually supported this. So the actual proposed action is to increase the size of these blasts from 100 pounds a day to 1,000 pounds a day. So that is a 10 times increase. And actually the current annual limit is 1,000 pounds a year. And they're proposing to also increase that to 7,500 pounds a year. So in these bigger outdoor blasts, there are going to be over 121 hazardous substances that will be included in these explosives. For those of you unfamiliar with the Central Valley, we have one of the lowest air quality in, I want to say the country, just California.
California and probably in the country.
It's just really bad. We've been bringing it up to some of the Congress members. I'll trace back to that at the end though. But it's just it's something that we don't need. All the activities that happen there do support all the nuclear weapons design. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. But as of now, we are, so Lawrence Livermore Lab did give themselves the green light to proceed with it. They found no significant impact, which was very expected of them to do. So as of now, it's in the hands of the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District. Excuse me. And they're the ones that can authorize the air permit needed for these blasts. So we do have an ongoing campaign of a petition. So if you haven't signed it yet, I'm sure I'll probably send up a follow-up email, just get a list from Mary Leah. But we do have an online petition on change.org. We have over 1,000 sign-ons once more. We're going to use those same letters we got for the other ones. This specific firing table that's outside is across the street from a state vehicular park, but also this specific firing table hasn't been characterized in its Superfund process. So it is a Superfund site. They used to use depleted uranium in these explosions, and they used to actually have bigger blasts in the past. From what Mary Leah and Scott has told me, they've found softball-sized chunks of uranium lying around these tables. So with these huge explosions, they're bound to be resuspended and or evaporated into the air. And Tracy's a really growing community, especially with the rising houses of the Bay Area. We're having a new development. It's all growing towards Site 300. We might end up like Livermore, where it's literally at the fence line across the street, having houses. And this new development's going to have 5,500 homes, and most of them aren't going to be local to the Central Valley. So already in my experience as outreach in Tracy, most people don't even know about Site 300, and if they know the name, they don't know what it means. So it's a very grave concern. So we're definitely campaigning for that now. And if I left any details out, maybe Mary.
No, you do.
Okay.
You do great.
All right, so sign the petition, please.
That Tri-Valley Cares is really, really, really happy that we hired Val, and she also does all of our Spanish translation and our outreach to the Spanish-speaking population. And in Tracy, that's about 40% of the population. And yet, the percentage of documents or even fact sheets that Livermore Lab feels it should translate into Spanish for this or for the Superfund cleanup is 0. Not even hola. All right. However, I'm going to not use my time to speak on something involving Livermore Lab or Tri-Valley Care so specifically. May I ask everybody who has a computer, because then people can look at it, to go to the ANA website, which is ananuclear.org. And then I'm going to ask you to simply scroll down to where it says, and I will model scrolling down. Underneath our issues, it says nuclear free front page. And in the middle, you'll see actually Valeria did this little graphic for the report. It will say right to know.
On the ANA website?
On the ANA.org, scroll down the front page, and you get to a thing that says the nuclear free front page, and it says right to know. It's the middle document. So here it is, and the briefest of backgrounds is at the AMA fall meeting in Idaho, in preparation for a panel on the Freedom of Information Act. Scott Yunt, who's the staff attorney at Tri-Valley Cares, prepared a field guide to the Freedom of Information Act, and that is, if you click this link, it has a little blog about it, and then at the bottom of the blog it says click here, and the guide is in PDF. What is valuable for every single organization in this room is that this is not a general guide to using the Freedom of Information Act. This is about how you use it at a Department of Energy site, right down to who do you send your Freedom of Information Act request to in the Department of Energy. So you get the same information that you might get Googling around how to use the Freedom of Information Act. But if you're a novice, it's sort of like, what do I do with this general theoretical information? And what Scott did was make it very practical and step-by-step for your organization. So it came up in the training on Sunday. It's come up a number of other times that groups really need help and a little bit of hand-holding to understand the Freedom of Information Act, to understand what kind of documents you can get from it, what kind of documents it's not relevant to. That is all in Scott's guide. I also want to point out, we did a panel with Jay Coghlan, with Scott Yunt, who prepared the guide, and with Nicholas at Hanford Challenge. And Nicholas, Scott, and if I recall correctly, Jay, I'll let you correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe all three panelists told the groups assembled that if you're new to the Freedom of Information Act and you draft a request and you actually want one of the three of them to read it and to offer some help, they can do that. I'll also add, the guide not only tells you how, why, and when, and where to file a Freedom of Information Act request, it also goes through the process of what if they lag and you want to administrate or deny your request and you want to administratively challenge it, how, where, why, and when you would do that with the exact information that's about the Department of Energy, not just general. And goes all the way to under what circumstances might you want to litigate. And Scott Yunt from Tri-Valley Cares does do FOIA litigation and is available for consultation. So I want to have this be a living document, and that's why I am commending it to your attention again.
I want to just let Bennette say just a little bit about what we learned in talking to McCaskill's aide, Pat Bond, about the Westlake landfill. And we had heard that EPA was just going to remove a third of the nuclear material there and cap the rest, but Pat said it's going to be 80% removed. And go ahead.
I really don't understand what he said, but I know that other people that understand this kind of issue, it's surprising to some of them, but yes, he was representing Claire McCaskill, and he said that they can't really remove 100% of what's going on in Westlake because of geographical things that are going on underground and stuff. And me personally, I actually want to follow up so I can understand what he's talking about. It can actually be more dangerous than just leaving it at a certain percentage. So that's basically what I needed to add to that.
Because if they go all the way down to the bottom, if the stuff is so unstable, it'll collapse. So they would have to make a huge wide hole, and then that would bring oxygen down to the stuff that's smoldering and set that on fire, is the fear. So that's why they can't remove, they say scientifically why they can't remove it all. I don't know. That's what they told us, anyway. And then as far as Kansas City goes, we're working on intersectionality quite a bit. The Poor People's Campaign, which you will hear about tomorrow, brings together 4 major issues, but a whole bunch of them under that. And we have 3 other coalitions forming in Kansas City. It's crazy. And so one of the things that we do to raise money in Kansas City is have an art fair in the fall. And so this year I'm in charge of that. And so I don't want it just to be art. I want to have other groups and do intersectionality work. So I'll just have them just pay $10 and have a table, and they can talk about what their organization's all about. A lot of peace and justice, but also public service, you know, helping like whole person or something like that. And also have music and make it more of an event, a bigger event. And then Memorial Day on the website, you can see a picture of us getting arrested at the plant in Kansas City. We do that every Memorial Day, and this year we'll have 4 people get arrested, so that'll bring our total up to 124 now. And Washington PSR is going to come with a great speaker July 7th to the 9th, and so we're hoping to get some another sort of venue where we'll draw different people than usually come. And then we've noticed that Honeywell is going into high schools, even Catholic high schools, to recruit. And so we pushed back on that. We've written to the bishop and the principal. We're not getting much feedback yet, but we'll keep on pushing. And I sent around to y'all about Deutsche Bank. They just announced that they're going to withdraw support from a lot of mass destruction kind of things, including nuclear weapons. And they were the ones that were really behind pushing or supporting Honeywell, which is our corporation.
Hi, everybody. My name is Allesya Casse. I am a nuclear activist working in Colorado. I'm here with the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center. Let me give you a little bit of history about Rocky Flats. Rocky Flats was a nuclear weapons plant facility that operated from 1952 to 1989 when it was shut down by the EPA and the FBI. Now it is completed its cleanup as of 2006, which means they buried most of the buildings in place, and they shipped off some of the more obvious contamination, like the barrels of waste that were sitting out in the open for decades where they leaked into the ground. So when they did the cleanup, they cleaned up just the central operating unit, which is, we call it the Deadly Donut. It's the central site, and it's still an actively managed DOE Superfund site. And the buffer zone is now a wildlife refuge. And we are in the fight of our lives right now. It is a clear and present danger that they are opening the wildlife refuge this summer. Why is this so scary? Because they never remediated anything in the wildlife refuge. So you're like, okay, well, there was some leaking, there was a weapons plant. There was also 2 huge, major, significant fires that happened that put a nuclear fallout cloud over the Denver metro area. And because of that, there was a large settlement 2 years ago that $375 million for homeowners in the area because they have permanent damage because they have plutonium that's never going away in their yards. So nobody's denying that there's not plutonium there. The question is, what is an allowable or safe level of exposure to weapons-grade plutonium? So that's what we're here, that's what we're up against, that's what we're fighting. We met with the DOE this week, we met with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Who ever thought we'd be fighting with fish and wildlife? But we are, and it's bad. Questions, comments, please, my other group members, feel free to chime in. I will tell you, I'm also with Candelas Glows. That's a local community group. We stage a large action protests to protest the houses that are being built in all of the nuclear contamination. And every time they build, they dig up a foundation, which resuspends and reanimates all of the plutonium that's in that area. Yay! School boards, yeah, Chris and Brittany have been absolutely fabulously amazing. They coordinated a long-term campaign and approach. We've spoken to many of the Denver Metro and Boulder Metro area school boards, and 7 of them have so far passed resolutions to say they are prohibiting school endorsed field trips to the Rocky Flats Wildlife Refuge, and it's over 300,000 students will not be going. So give them rounds of applause.
I have something to offer. We had a meeting with the NRC, and we spoke with their materials technical assistant. And one of our concerns, of course, reproductive justice issue, and I think this probably aligns with you, is the reference manual, right, and like dosage and exposure. And she shared with us a couple of resources I could probably share with you, because we're looking to connect with, I think it was a somebody and a somebody, but that they're the group that do the thing. So I can share that with you, and we can work that out.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other? Yes, sir.
I certainly applaud your work with school districts and what you're accomplishing there. If I could respectfully offer a suggestion, that you always talk about it as allowable exposure. If you want to say anything about safety, you can say because no exposure is safe.
Right.
Never say allowable or safe, because that's not the choice.
Great, thank you. Well, the state says it's safe, so.
Yeah.
State paid by the DOE. Can't make this up.
I'm just going to do a 30,000-foot overview of nuclear power plants in the country. So one of the big issues that comes to my mind is this bailout attempt for old reactors that should have been shut down a long time ago, should be shut down as soon as possible. We've already suffered 2 losses on that front. New York State, a year and a half ago, Governor Andrew Cuomo, a Democrat, orchestrated through his Public Service Commission a $7.6 billion ratepayer-funded bailout to keep 4 old reactors going up on the Lake Ontario shore of upstate New York. They're pushing, some of these reactors are pushing 50 years old now. They're 10 years into their license extensions. They were originally licensed for 40 years. So that was unfortunate. The money is taken out of clean energy funding that's supposed to be climate mitigation funding. And it's really preserving a couple thousand jobs, maybe. They're platinum-plated jobs, so that's one way of putting it. In Illinois, NEIS was here, Dave Kraft and Lynn Lewis, and they fought hard against a similar bailout in Illinois, $2.35 billion, which have bought another 10 years of operations at 3 old reactors in Illinois. And the one company that's making all the money on this at ratepayer expense is Hutchison Nuclear of Chicago. That's one company getting all that money in both states. So we're facing other attempted money grabs in the PJM grid, which is 13 states plus DC, and Exelon Nuclear is the electricity provider in DC, compliments of Mayor Bowser, unfortunately. This is an outlandish request that's orchestrated by First Energy of Ohio, which has 2 reactors in Ohio, 2 reactors in Northwest Pennsylvania. And on behalf of their competitors, if you can believe that, in electricity generation, they have asked the federal government through Energy Secretary Kerry and President Trump to provide an $8 billion per year bailout to the whole 13-state region to keep not only nuclear power plants going, but also coal plants. So it's a grand total of 80 plants, nuclear and coal, $8 billion per year. I believe it's ratepayer money, but there might even be some taxpayer component. And they're using the 100-year-old Federal Power Act as their launch pad for this request. Usually an emergency provision under a wartime scenario or a natural disaster scenario. That's not been activated in Puerto Rico, but they're about to activate it in the Rust Belt. So Trump met with 2 First Energy lobbyists over dinner about a month ago and thought it was a great idea. So something to watch out for. If we can block these subsidies, these reactors could close. So that's a hopeful thing. On the new reactor front, Vogtle, I don't know if Lindsay will probably talk about Vogtle. The 2 reactors still under construction there. It wasn't widely reported, but the Trump administration granted another $3.7 billion in nuclear loan guarantees on the federal level, making it $12 billion on on top of the 8.3 that Obama had already given under Ernest Moniz at DOE, who now has a seat on the board of directors of Southern Nuclear. There's something wrong about that. And another funny thing about Moniz is, you know, for more than a half century, there was no connection whatsoever between atoms for peace and atoms for war, right? Moniz, supporting the bailout in the radioactive Rust Belt, said, we need those nuclear plants to keep running because we need that expertise for use in our nuclear weapons infrastructure. So I guess that separation now is being admitted to being false. So I've got 1 minute.
Kevin, if you just note that in New York, there still is an ongoing lawsuit to challenge the bailout on the basis of inadequate hearing process.
That's awesome. And similar news on the Rust Belt, radioactive Rust Belt. Sierra Club one has said if Trump dares do this, that there will be a lawsuit.
I just wanted to point out that former DOE Secretary Ernest Moniz, I forget whether he's president or CEO, whatever the title is, of the Nuclear Threat Initiative, which tries to position itself in the forefront of, you know, making a safer world with nuclear weapons. So they're kind of astroturf for whatever, in my view.
Thank you.
So I want to talk briefly about the other repository. We've talked about Yucca Mountain. The other repository is the one that's actually operating, the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, or WIPP in New Mexico, and also try to make clear a connection that's happening between WIPP and one of the other things we've been fighting a long time, which is the mixed oxide fuel. So for those of you who need the quick refresher, WIPP is 2,150 feet underground in southeastern New Mexico in a salt area. It was contaminated on Valentine's Day of 2014 with a radiation release. The underground is contaminated and will forever be contaminated because it can't be cleaned up. So workers are continuing to work in the underground. They are working in full protective equipment and respirators. There is an attempt to take them out of that, so they're working underground in a contaminated area. So far, to their credit, the WIPP site manager is resisting that pressure to take the workers out. Of course, some of the workers are also trying to avoid being taken out of the respirators, but that's one issue for people to know. Second issue is this is an election year in New Mexico, as in other places. Our Republican governor, who doesn't believe in regulation, will be leaving office after 8 years. So what DOE is doing in New Mexico with WIPP is trying to make as many changes as possible, modifications to the WIPP permit this year before a new governor comes in who undoubtedly wouldn't be quite as favorable toward them and might be much less favorable toward them. So we're in an ongoing battle over several changes to the permit that they're trying to do that we're trying to resist in one way or another. One of them, very importantly, does have a connection with the MOX plant. So DOE put in a modification request to change the way waste is counted at WIPP. They call it volume of record, but what that effectively means is what they want to do is say 30% of the waste that's underground at WIPP doesn't count. So that's a way to expand the capacity, is to say that by just literally not moving any waste, but just changing how it's calculated, the numbers of how it's calculated, they would have 30% more volume to put in the underground than they have. The reason this is important, the volume for WIPP is established by law in Congress. So unless you can change the law in Congress, the only way you can get more in is to say some of what you have in, you don't have to count. So on or about June 1st, the New Mexico Environment Department will make a decision about that modification. And presumably they will approve it, although there's variety of things going on in addition to all the comments that people put in to try to reverse that. So there may need to be some litigation about that to delay final implementation of this decision until the next administration where things might be different. But also, why is it that they need 30% or more additional capacity? It's because DOE has now decided, since they want to kill the mixed oxide fuel plant in South Carolina, which is a good thing. We've all been trying to kill it for 20 years, so if that happens, that would be a good thing. But of course, if you don't put the surplus weapons plutonium into the MOX plant, you have to then say what you're going to do with it. And their preferred bad alternative is to say they're going to dilute it and dispose of it in the WIPP. So WIPP doesn't have enough capacity for this surplus plutonium unless some of Hanford's waste or Idaho's waste or Los Alamos waste doesn't go into WIPP. So that a driving factor in terms of why they want to change how much waste can be in the WIPP is so they can argue they have space for some or all of this surplus plutonium. So down the line, the thing that's important about this, down the line, once we hopefully have in the next several months to a year, we have MOX killed and dead, we'll need to have a major campaign to stop, dilute, and dispose of that WIPP. I'll stop.
Thank you.
Maybe I think I'll probably done.
Remember, we have to take a break.
Except Lindsay, she's on there too. Do we
All
have
right.
time?
So a few things that we are up to at the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation in Santa Barbara. One thing that we do a lot of is monitoring what is happening at the Vandenberg Air Force Base in terms of Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missiles. This is not a Department of Energy thing. It is through Air Force and Air Force Global Strike Command. But what they do a few times a year is they pull a Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missile out of a silo in one of the states in kind of the west, midwest, north, and bring it to Vandenberg. They replace the nuclear warhead with a dummy warhead, and they shoot it to the Marshlands, about 4,200 miles. And they say that they do these to test the reliability of the system, make sure everything is safe and secure and up to date. But they also say that sometimes they will explicitly say they're sending a geopolitical signal to reassure our allies and let our adversaries know what we're capable of. So this is a very disturbing thing to us, especially in light of what's going on with North Korea, the U.S. demanding that they dismantle their ICBM program, etc. They did, interestingly, postpone 2 tests that were scheduled for February to respect, we believe, the Olympic truce. So that was kind of good, but then they did just launch them in the past few weeks. Let's see, a couple other things I wanted to mention. One is, just a few weeks ago, I was in Geneva for the Non-Proliferation Treaty Conference. That was not all that interesting, but I did get to go to the ICANN campaigners meeting. And that was our first global gathering since the Nobel Peace Prize, so it was really wonderful, a lot of amazing energy. We're feeling really good about what's going on internationally among many dedicated non-nuclear states. They're really doing the right thing, signing and ratifying the nuclear ban treaty. One really useful piece of information is that the rate of ratification of the nuclear ban treaty is actually faster than any other arms control or nuclear arms treaty in the past. So more countries have ratified the nuclear ban treaty today than historically ratified the non-proliferation treaty at that snapshot in time, right? So we're 8 months into the process of it being open for ratification. 10 countries have ratified. I think at this time, in the NPT, maybe 8 had ratified. So it's popular, it's going well, and there is a lot of momentum behind it, despite what some people from our country might say. And then just the other thing I wanted to mention, Mary Leah pointed out that article on the ANA website about FOIA. I kind of de facto manage the ANA website. I don't have a lot of free time, but it's something I can do fairly easily. So if you have content for the ANA website, just email me and let me know. Whether it's a blog post or some photos, or you find some typos or whatever, just email me and we'll get it out there.
Rick, could you describe both the tenor and the substance of the American delegation at the NPT prep conference?
Sure. So I called it a charm offensive, kind of comparing, that's what we were criticizing North Korea for during the Olympics. But this was a really offensive charm offensive. They were regularly talking about how the nuclear posture review is not anything to be worried about. Everything's cool. It was pretty shocking. Joseph Rogers, who was also there, his term for it was an infomercial. So they how in an infomercial, the salesman is very uppity and like kind of push. This is the greatest thing ever, and that's kind of like what they were doing. So yeah, it was offensive, and everyone pretty much saw through it.